Welcome to At a Crossroads with a Naked Podcaster, where we bear it all spiritually and emotionally. I'm your host, Jen Taylor. Each week on the podcast, I'll bring you an inspiring message to support you in designing and creating a vibrant, fulfilling life. Before we dive in, please visit the Facebook community in the links to ask questions that I can answer during this live podcast. At a Crossroads with a Naked Podcaster is for those of you who know that there is more to life and that our true, authentic souls are built for greatness. You are built with strength and love that is meant to shine through in times of conflict and in times of celebration. Welcome. I cannot wait to bear it all with you. In my business, I coach Christian women to step into who they are meant to be, inspired by their purpose and God-given gifts. Find the link in the description to join my private Facebook group. I can't wait to see you there. Let's get started.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, Nancy. So to preface this interview, you were on 2 years ago. Almost exactly. November's a big month for you. I mean,
It is.
Not that being my show was a big event, but it happened to be 2 years ago, almost exactly. And I want to talk about that first show. First of all, in 4.5 years, your podcast interview is the most watched and listened to, even though we didn't actually, it was 2 months before I went to video, from audio to video. And so even though on my YouTube channel, you turn it into a video by having the little lines in the bottom, it's a picture in the background. And that's it. It's not even an interactive video, and it's still number one. And I always describe it to people, this interview, I use you as an example, but I think about you at least weekly, because your podcast interview, aside from my daughter who made me cry on a podcast interview, in 4.5 years, your initial interview is the only time as an interviewer that I cried.
Thank
you for that.
Making you cry.
Oh, you know what? Here's the thing. You and I have talked in our conversations about how sexual abuse is talked about more and more, but incest less.
Yes, absolutely.
There's a lot of shame involved. There's a lot of judgment involved. I think it's one of the most difficult conversations to have. And you have so much bravery. It's just astounding to me. It's just astounding. So I did link our first interview. People should definitely go and listen to that one also. You still have Tale of the Bell. And I remember being confused about the name, and you explained it. I was like, oh, how did I not figure that out before? Let's jump in and talk to me about Tale of the Bell, all things Tale of the Bell.
Okay. So just a refresher, Tale of the Bell is a company that I actually started in November of 17. And I started it as a way to stepping into my next chapter, my coming to terms with a different level of my past and desiring to step in and help others. So it is a coaching organization. I work full time doing compliance for an insurance company, but my side kind of passion is this organization, and it's focused. It was probably one of the first of its kind, but focused on direct support for incest survivors. So, because as you said, it's a place where it's a topic that it's got so much baggage around it. And it's this, if you say something, you're going to lose your family. There's so many, what am I trying to say? There's so many opportunities to be further hurt if and when you disclose, because you then potentially lose the family that you have, or it's a myth, and stepping into that myth and honoring that myth is, it's got its own set of circumstances. But it permeates throughout your life and everything that you do and every relationship that you have. And until you learn to connect to it and understand it, then you can't move past it. You can't integrate it. So, so Tell the Bell is my way of supporting individuals. I coach individually and group, although I don't. It's not, like I said, it's a part-time gig, and I tend to limit the number of folks that I do in a particular year, but just based on capacity. But I do have Tell the Bell as a podcast where I interview individual survivors. But I haven't been doing it, the podcast, in probably a little over a year. And some of that is because I had some life circumstances too through COVID. And while I've interviewed a number of folks, I haven't taken those interviews and done anything with them. And part of that is I'm really kind of assess where is it that I want to best utilize my time. And I'm trying to take Tell the Bell in another direction, in a way, because I want to make it. I want something in between. Coaching is expensive, but the podcast doesn't have any interactivity. So I want to do something in between. So I'm looking to establish a community, but I need to do it in a safe environment. So I've been researching software package that would allow me to do it. How to make it. I'm not looking to make money off it, but at the same time, I can't be putting out tens of dollars, personally, tens of thousands of dollars into personally. So I just need to kind of figure out what that balance is and how it all fits together. And I'm hoping to launch that first quarter of next year. That's the goal.
I love the changes because so many people think, you have this brilliant business idea here and you're done. Like, check, that's done. And business is fluid and not static. It changes constantly. Like you said, with the pandemic, most people can certainly, if they couldn't before, they can certainly now relate to the fact that there are a lot of changes and we can't always control them. And when you move through them, it kind of changes you, your life, your perspective, where you want to take things. And for you, it's part-time, like you said. So,
right.
Yeah, podcast editors listening should get in touch with Nancy to keep it going. I think it's so important, though, because one thing I love about your podcast is that you're interviewing other survivors, and it's a topic that's not discussed enough. We're afraid of it for some reason, or upset by it in ways that we can't navigate through to listen more or to talk about it more. It's so odd to me. But those other survivors in your platform, it's more, and I just think with the podcast, you can benefit a lot of people at once, where you and I are both, we both do coaching. One-on-one is one-to-one, and even group is only a certain number to one. The amount of impact you can make in those situations is definitely limited. So I love that you want to make this more broad scale and make some changes, but yeah.
All right, I'm going to pause you for a second. So this is your live moment of, I have a dog that needs to go out. Just one second.
I love this. Here we are living real life. I told Nancy that I thought one of the downsides to having a live video is that all these weird things would happen, and how once someone had to change their toddler's diaper in my interview, but I wasn't live then, so I cut it out. I'm like, those are the best moments in life. Here we are, letting the dog out.
So, there you go. So the dog's out now until you won't hear the whine. So
okay. Until my dog does this really interesting thing. She knocks. She puts her paw up and she taps on the door. Like, she's like, hello, could you let me back in? I'm very, I'm sitting here very politely knocking. Okay, so we did the interview 2 years ago, almost exactly. Let's highlight, because I think I'm remembering one thing incorrectly. So this is incest. So it was your biological father who groomed you and raped you for years. When did the grooming started? When you were young?
So I was raised in an Italian immigrant type family, very much. You know, you. I have 7 brothers and sisters, so it was always about taking care of each other. The family comes first, that kind of stuff. So it was a it was a kind of a strict household, Catholic home household, and so there was always this honor the father kind of thing, all of that kind of happening throughout. Physical discipline was involved early on as a young child, and in a few instances, it definitely overstepped discipline kind of thing. But it was always more about the grooming. I think was more about my father got sick. Like he's always had heart problems, and he got sick, and it was one of the first quadruple bypasses done. And it was, we need to take care of him. We need to be whatever. And my mother kind of stepped up took a second job kind of thing, and so wasn't in the house very much. And so I became my dad's nursemaid. So it kind of became an extension of that, in terms of, you know, good girls kind of support their parents or do what's needed to be done, and no matter what that means. So I was 13 when it became sexual.
Okay.
But yeah, but prior to me, which I didn't know at the time, but prior to me, he had been with one of my older sisters, but not the other, which was kind of a weird situation.
Isn't it often a weird situation that you just can't make sense of no matter what?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how do you make sense of it, period? And then how do you make sense of the weird nuances within that? Why choose 2 out of those 3, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. So it went on for about a year before he was a podiatrist. So I mean, I was raised in an upper middle class family in the suburbs kind of thing. My father was a podiatrist. My mother was a nurse practitioner. So I mean, this happens anywhere. This is not a isolated certain demographic. So I think that's also something that people just don't understand, that it is across the board in every possible type of family that there is.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so 14 years old. He was a podiatrist. I was working in his office, and so over the summers I would work with him more intensely. And a teacher noticed a behavior change and reported it, and started down the counseling path and whatever. And from there, it kind of came out, and I ended up in court through the social services department, and being pulled, from the home, temporarily placed into kinship foster care, and he got pulled from the home. So that's the kind of the gist of how that came to be. But in the process of all of that, I mean, even just being in court was traumatizing. Being asked to stand in front of a judge with, my parents, my sisters, my, attorneys. There's probably 10, 15 people in the room being asked to explain, what did your father do? I lost my voice. And that's something that it took me, I still struggle with it today, believe it or not. But yeah, self-advocation is a real difficult thing for me. Something learned, but took a long time to get there. But I viewed that court situation as the court acknowledged that we were both at fault, because my father used to tell me that if something happened, if you say something, they won't understand, they will take you away, and it will be your fault. And so I interpreted the court response of it was my fault as equally as him, because we both received the same punishment. We were both taken out of the home. We were both sentenced to therapy. And then we were both allowed back in the home at the same time. So that kind of set the stage for allowing him to continue, because I viewed being pulled from everything that I knew and placed into a foster care situation as worse than, at least if I'm in the home or whatever, this can be going on, but at least I have an outlet. I have other things going on, and with my siblings, whatever. So I never said anything again until he died. He died when I was 28 years old. So
I don't think this is uncommon, and I know there's a lot of confusion because I was involved with foster care for 15 years, that how could these kids want to go back into a place that's abusive, regardless of the type of abuse, when they get pulled into foster care. And treatment level foster kids, which I worked with for a section of my time, those are the toughest of the tough situations. And it's not the child's fault. It's that they have been through more. They've been in and out of mental institutions and or juvenile detention because of the situation that they came from. And even in sex trafficking, where sex trafficked kids are rescued, they stand up for and sometimes run away to go back to the perpetrator, their pimp. And it's a really interesting situation that makes total sense to me after all of the time that I've spent, is that, one, you don't really know, you don't know what you don't know as a kid in an abusive situation. I knew that things were wrong in my household growing up. I knew when CPS came to my house when I was about 10 and they drove away without me, that I should have been in that car, but I didn't know why. I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know how to ask. And right, like I was born in 1970. So in the 70s, when, I don't know how old you were when you were, I mean, what year it was when you were 14.
So I was born in 64. So 78
Okay,
was when it was reported, and 78 was the first year of mandatory reporting. They had no idea what they were doing.
They had no idea what they were doing. No, I mean, no idea. So you and I were in similar we were in abusive situations at similar times. And also, people don't understand what it was really like in the 70s, like what commercials were like and what attitudes towards women were like. That doesn't excuse it, but man, it sure changes it a lot when you get it in the context of the time period. And that's, again, it does not excuse it, but they did not know what they were doing. And so even now that the system is still tremendously broken, but has come a long way, these kids want to go back. They want their family. They want what's familiar because they don't want to feel like you did, like you're being punished and it's your fault that this is happening. And kids blame themselves. And in some situations, when you get moved to foster care, like you said, at least at home, you had certain things, right? You were an upper middle class family. Foster care doesn't always look better.
Exactly. There just aren't enough good homes. There's a lot of abuse that happens in foster care. And that didn't happen to me. This was a kinship. This was my sister. So that's not what anything along those lines, but it happens a lot. And I think it's also about, to me, what's normalcy, right?
Right.
You attribute normal to what you know and how you were raised. And it's not until you're further exposed to the world that you begin to understand that your normal isn't normal.
Yeah. Right? I mean, I remember growing up, we were below poverty level a lot of the time, and you don't know what that means as a kid. And my best friend growing up was very upper middle class. She had a living room we weren't allowed in, because it was like the grown-up room. And it didn't click for me as a junior high school or whatever, that she had a house with a room that was too nice for us to be in. You know what I mean? Like, it just didn't occur to me, even though I got all my hand-me-down clothes from her and stuff like that. Kids aren't looking outside of the situation in comparatively and trying to put things in boxes or figure them out. She was just my best friend that I loved, and she had nice clothes, and I was excited to get hand-me-downs. And we didn't go into her living room. Like, I did not think about it outside of that context. You have to get older and have more life experience to even think about questioning it.
Yeah. But you also have to be ready for it, right? I mean, particularly with incest survivors, the average reporting age for when people first disclose incest is in their 50s. So that's staggering to think about that. I mean, the statistics are 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18. And probably 70 to 80% of them are by someone that they know, and generally a family member. Now, I think that there are extremes to that. You know, it could have been once, it could have been a distant uncle, it could have been a grandfather, it could be whatever, it could be a mother, it could be whatever. But, you know, there are clearly extremes to, you know, multiple, you know, day-to-day type things, and how the family responds, right? So does the family support the perpetrator, which things then just snowballs from there, because there's where you go self-blaming, right? Or does the family stand up and be outraged? If the family is not outraged at your disclosure, or they question or disbelieve you, there's just a whole nother level of dynamic. It's like somebody's running home because they just got notice that their house is on fire. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to go help figure out, how do I get the fire put out? How do I help them recover? How do I move on? But that's not the way that people respond when somebody discloses or says, I'm being raped by my father. No, what you get back is, what? That didn't happen. Well, why can we believe that somebody's house is on fire, but we can't believe that somebody's going through this kind of trauma? That's
It's true though. I
bewildering.
mean, I was molested by my stepfather, and I did bring it up, and it wasn't addressed. As a matter of fact, it was kind of joked about. And I remember realizing that you don't get seen and you don't get heard, and no one will be there to help you. If CPS is driving away and I did say something and it wasn't listened to, you learn real quickly that you're on your own, essentially.
Yep.
And that
Grin and bear it.
nobody's there. Yeah. Wow. So let's talk. You met your husband when? You were in high school.
I was 15 years old when I met my husband. We started dating when I was 16, just after my 16th birthday. He was 16 as well. And he was the only guy I had ever been with. And this crap was still going on. So he was my outlet, but he didn't know. And he at one point, I think I actually said to him, I that, I need to tell you something. I was in foster care for a little bit, and I was abused by my father, but and so I said I was an incest survivor, at that age, like 16, 17. And he says it was okay. I remember just sitting on his porch steps and having this conversation. Gave me a hug, and it was all kind of go from there. It was years and years and years later that he told me that he had to go ask his mother what incest meant. So that was the level of conversation we had around it. But it didn't define he and I. And so he became my, I call him my everything. He was who I went to for support. I knew that we went through a lot together over the years. And I just knew that he was always going to be there no matter what. And so he made things safe. And he opened up a side of me that, I didn't know existed. And his family helped, because his family wasn't, I shouldn't use this word, but his family was a more typical, normal kind of family, where, they supported each other, and, they raised kids and whatever, and they had family gatherings and whatever. So I got in little ways to be modeled and see how a family functioned. Outside of my own.
Which, isn't that great? I had that too, and I didn't put it together at that age, but it was my best friend's family. Although still in the 70s, it was kind of unique, the 70s and the early 80s. Although I did get to see that, which was really helpful. Like it is different other places. So I want to jump in. So he was your safe place. Also, you guys married. So let's talk about sex, right? We know that your father forced you to have sex. And then there was your husband.
Yep. So, early on with my husband, so we started dating when I was 16. We didn't have sex for the first time until I was 18. So we were good friends, and we had developed a relationship, and it wasn't about not wanting to. It was, I guess it was part of that. But it wasn't something that I didn't want to go down that path. He wasn't ready to go down that path, and it was okay. So we started as just really good friends. And that then led to figuring out, oh, this can be good. This can feel good, this, but so keep in mind too, that I was his first. So we're learning together, and it was all good. And for me, so I probably shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. He had a scar on his butt. And so during sex, I relied on that because I knew that I could, touch in that area, I knew it was him. So if I started
Oh, wow.
disassociating during sex, it grounded me, and that wasn't a one and only. But I mean, there were times when I would disassociate, and I never wanted to be in a situation where I wasn't present in sex or in intimacy. And he knew enough that afterwards we could talk about it, and he'd be like, "What can I do to help? How do I stop? I mean, what?" And so we had a very open communication sex life. This feels good. This doesn't feel good. That's going to trigger me. So don't do that, or whatever the situation. And so we figured it out, but it took a long time to figure it out. Years to figure it out.
You guys got married. Your husband, I mean, your dad through this was still abusing you. And did he know? Did your husband know?
He did not know that it had continued. It's like I
Right.
lived a compartmentalized life, right? I couldn't do anything that would jeopardize the relationship that I had with my husband. He was my safe place. Like I said, he was my everything, right? He was the father of my children. I mean, I had children when my father was still, and not very frequently, but still. And I think it was this huge fear that something bad would happen again upon disclosure. And that bad would be that I would lose my husband at that point in time. So,
Right.
And plus it was something that I was not mentally equipped to be able to deal with it, with my father. So it was easier to just compartmentalize, put it over here, and stopped. Okay, I can move on. It was, I wouldn't call it a multiple personality because that wasn't what was going on. I was very aware. It was truly a compartmentalization situation.
I understand that. One question that I'm sure people have asked before is, at some point, why didn't you say no to your father?
So you know what? That was one of the things that took me the longest and the hardest to get through, right?
Yeah.
There was a part of me that not only feared my father because he was physically abusive, but he was a frail man, particularly later on. So some of it was fear, but what people don't understand is I still loved him. I still had the sense of obligation. I mean, he wasn't all bad. He did
Right.
bad things, but he wasn't 100% bad. So we still had a relationship. There was still the whole family dynamic. There was, again, think back, I was pulled away from the family. I didn't want to be ostracized. He was the patriarch, I mean, so it was just a difficult situation. And I can't answer that question in any more detail or any more definitively.
I know, and it's a tough one because once you were married and living with your husband and you had kids and stuff like that, none of it makes sense at all. That's just one part of what doesn't make sense. But I understand what you're saying as far as that goes. Now, there was a point though, because there was a point where you said no more and your husband found out, correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
So when I was 28, my father died. So I spent a lot of time, and particularly my my mid to late 20s, distancing myself from him. Like I didn't say no in that context. However, I avoided it ever being in a one-on-one situation with him. And I avoided my children being one-on-one with him. I mean, so it was more of an avoidance, which is what prevented it from being more frequent.
Got it.
As an adult. But it wasn't like it was as a teenager. It wasn't, every week as an adult.
Yeah.
It was, maybe once in a year or something like that. It wasn't, but I still couldn't say no. So, the part of me that still believes that despite all the therapy, despite how grounded I am, despite 30 years later, if my father somehow magically appeared and walked into the room, I'd still be afraid of him. And I probably still couldn't stand up to him today,
And how
which is scary.
that is scary and understandable. Your husband found out that your dad was still being abusive.
So what happened was my father died when I was 28,
When you were 28.
and
Okay.
I fell apart. It was like all of a sudden everything that I had compartmentalized exploded, and I was just completely overwhelmed. It was like everything that I hadn't allowed myself to feel all of a sudden started popping back. I was having flashbacks. I was having and I was suicidal. I checked myself into a acute psychiatric hospital 2 weeks after his death, and I was there for 19 days, and that started my path towards healing. And I think of his death right now as he died on December 23rd, and that is now my me day. It is the day that I celebrate every year I don't really celebrate my birthday. I celebrate my me day, and it was the day that I was reborn. It was the day that I fully accepted and came into being me, because it was the first time that I felt safe enough to honor myself. So my husband found out in the course of that treatment program. My therapist in the hospital actually helped and bridge that that conversation, that communication. Same thing, communication with my mother, who at that point in time, for the first time in her life, stood up for me and was there for me, and later became my friend. She hadn't done that before. But in that moment she did, because I came to later understand that my mother was just as diminished and abused in her own way, at least emotionally, as I was. So she couldn't. And I was able to forgive her for that, and we became friends until she died.
What about the sisters? Because your two older sisters, he had sexually abused one of them and the other one he hadn't, and you had a kinship with one of them. I know it's a big family, so was a kinship with, how did that all work? And your relationship with your sisters?
So I have 7 brothers and sisters. My oldest sister, we moved when I was 9 years old. And my oldest sister, who was 9 years older than me, she was 18 at the time, she didn't move with us. Prior to that, we had lived in a 2-family home with my grandmother, my father's mother, and my sister stayed with my grandmother. So we didn't really have a close relationship. And so she was always a little bit separate. My next oldest sister was a year younger than that. So she moved with us. And so she kind of became a quasi mother, because my mother was always working from a financial perspective. So I had a stronger relationship with my second oldest sister than my oldest sister. But it was the kinship foster care placement was with my oldest sister and her husband. So my brother-in-law and my oldest sister. Yeah. And it came about because they had their own home. They were in a different town. They wouldn't grant custody just to my mother because of their interpretation of her response. They didn't feel that she was capable of handling the situation, so they wouldn't leave us with her. And it was an interesting time, because even in that, one of the things that I did as part of the healing process is I actually got the foster care, the social services records, and actually kind of was able to put pieces together, and reading their interpretation of my mother's response, that she was emotionally detached, that she was, and I understand it differently today. I understand it as she was just as overwhelmed as anybody else,
Right.
But that's how that came about. And I do have relationships with the majority of my siblings, but not all of them today, for various different reasons. I also have a younger sister who I later found out after he stopped with me, he moved on to her. And I thought I was protecting her, and I didn't.
It's not that you didn't. I
So.
thought the same thing with my younger sister. Like, you're trying to take the hit for the younger ones because you already know you're strong enough to handle it, and it doesn't stop it from happening. And then you feel like this guilt that you didn't do enough, although like there was nothing that I could have done. Actually, I potentially I was making it worse and without realizing it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think in a child's mind, you think you're helping and being brave and being strong, and that's not in reality what's happening in the
Right.
situation.
Exactly.
You went through a lot of healing, and I already put in the comments that in November of 2013 that your husband died. He committed suicide.
Yep.
So then the person that you guys had this, what I'm going to jump to a conclusion. You had this really actually wonderful relationship, especially considering how young you were and
Mhm.
how you've been together for 28 years at that point, and how long you've been
Mhm.
together. I mean, that's hard, not having a good relationship. You guys did it starting young with a good relationship. And
Yeah.
because it was a suicide, that's all kinds of aspects of different stuff. So then you had to work through that situation. This is, you were 28
Mhm.
when your dad died and you fell apart. You're 48, like 21, 49. You were 21 more years had passed of you guys together.
Correct. Yep.
And then you had to navigate that with your two boys.
4. So in between
Oh,
there,
you four. I'm sorry. Yeah.
yeah, so in between there, so I had 2 biological children together, and then after this whole situation with after my father died, we agreed we wanted to do something more, and so we fostered to adopt and adopted twins, special needs twins, through the foster care system. So
That's
I have 4
right.
boys, 2 of them
That's right.
biological, 2 adopted. Yeah. And it was my 14-year-old special twins who found him and watched him die um, on the floor of our home, that because he was seizing when they found him, and I was away on a business trip. So it was a nightmare. It was like everybody's worst nightmare coming up and happening. And so I not only was I dealing with my own intense loss, as like I said, he was my everything. I mean, my world centered around him. He grounded me, and we were together for 33 years, married for 28. He was my best friend. I mean, he was my lover. He was the father of my children, and he was just my safe place. And so I needed to really learn that he didn't keep me safe. I kept me safe, but he was my mirror, and I had to find other alternatives to get through that. But I literally fell apart, but in a controlled way, because I had to be there for my children. My 14-year-old kids needed me, and there was no way that it was bad enough having now lost a parent to suicide. I can't even
Right.
imagine what it would have been like for them if they had lost 2 parents to suicide. So that wasn't an option. So again, it's figure it out, work through it, get the help you need. I had some amazing people step in and help me. My oldest son, who was 24 at the time, he was going through his graduate program, and he had just finishing up, and he hadn't lived in home in 6 years, and he moved back in with his girlfriend
Mm.
to help me, and they were amazing and helpful. And I like to think of it as that sometimes a tragedy kind of either can tear a family apart or can pull a family back together. And it
Yeah.
was not easy. There's no way I'm going to tell you that it was easy. There were moments there that, believe me, I had some very angry children, and that anger was displaced to projected towards me or directed to my older son. Um,
Right. Of
and so
course. Right.
it was understandable, but it took a lot of years to get through that. Now, today, my children are happy, healthy. They're in touch with their feelings. They each are independent, and they're enjoying their own lives. So I'm very fortunate in that respect. But I think one of
And
the
it's been,
hardest things for me,
yeah. Yeah. Go.
good. So I think one of the
It's
hardest
been
things for me
8
is
years now.
figuring what I do. It's been 8 years. It'll be 8 years this November. Yeah. Well, 8 years
Okay.
on the 20th. But the hardest thing for me was, okay, my youngest are 14. They're not going to need me forever. What am I going to do? How can I'd never really been alone, right? How do I be alone? And I didn't want to become a burden on my kids. That wasn't fair to them. So I needed to take control of my own life and figure out what I was doing. From a work perspective, that's how Tale of the Bell was born, because it was it was what happened again after my husband died. in how my childhood flooded back to me, and trying to find resources to help me was, once again, it's like nothing had changed, or very little had changed since when I was a kid in those 20 something years. So I just felt someone needed to do something. And then I went, who's someone? So if it's someone, why is it not me? And I kind of figured out how to do that. And that's how Tale of the Bell was born. But the next aspect of that was, how do I not be alone? I don't want to be alone. I learned how to be alone. But then I said, I don't want to be alone. I don't want to go through my older years alone. So what do I want?
And
And how
now
do I do?
let's point out again that you've been intimate with two people, and one of them was about as dysfunctional as you can possibly get. And so 8 years ago, you're re-navigating this. So I have a couple of friends that have gotten divorced after 20 plus years, and have to navigate dating in a totally different situation, and a situation of choice. And your
Right.
situation was one of no choice. And
Yeah.
oh my gosh, so this is what I want to spend our remaining time talking about is,
Yeah.
like, these were
Ouch.
your words, right? I don't even know, like, one thing you've been focused on in this last year. So let's talk about the last couple of years and what that's been like. So, and being intimate with
So,
somebody again.
so I started putting my toe in the water, thinking, okay, if my kids are 14, when they turn 18, they're going to want to be here. So I really started thinking ahead with, how do I do this? And so I started putting my toe in the water in terms of dating. I joined a Life After Lost widowers group, widow and widowers group, and had a one kind of date, and it was very, very apparent my children were not ready for it. I mean, one of the things that one of my twins said was, it's not right, you're replacing dad. And I was like, I will never replace your father. There is no possibility of replacing your father. And if your father walked through that door today, I would be the first person to go and embrace it and welcome it. But it's not going to happen. And so now look at it the other way and say, do you want me by myself, or do you want me to be happy? But it took a long time to get through that with my son, that one. So I waited a few years. So I didn't really start putting toe really into the water until they had turned 18. So it was 2017 that I really started to think about, okay, what's next for me and what do I do? And I didn't know anything. I'd never dated. My husband and I had started as friends. We never date. And I was 15, So it's like, I didn't even know anything about, online dating or how do you meet people. I mean, how do you meet people as an adult in the first place, right? Outside of online dating or whatever, right? Even that's all scary. And then how do you talk to somebody, and how do you all of that stuff? I actually had a dear friend of mine's daughter help me write a dating profile because I had to navigate it, right? It's like, I don't even know what to say. What do you say? Anyway,
It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I probably had. I dated, once or twice, two different guys for like one or two dates before I met a guy online that I really liked, and what was interesting about the start of that relationship, was I was traveling in India. I had a team in India for work, and I was traveling in India and he was here, and I was there for like 3 weeks, and we had just started conversing while I was over there. So we spent every night for 3 weeks just texting back and forth. So it was safe. It was, there was no commitment. And so when I came back, I wanted to meet him. And it kind of just went from there. He was a great guy. And so that was April of 18. By Christmas of that year, he moved in with me.
So here we
But
are 3.5 years in, and I didn't know about this 2 years ago because you weren't even, I was like, what? That's okay. We have a lot to unpack. It's no big deal. So he's a great guy, and you meet, and I mean, right, you have navigating dating after all of this. You have dating profiles. You have the whole thing.
yeah,
And then it's being intimate with somebody again and being like, oh, and by the way, just in case you look on the internet, you might find out some interesting facts about me. So
so
talk about that.
the benefit of that is I started telling the bell of 17.
Mhm.
So my website was up, my story was up. I had been doing podcasts, I had shared. So I was just like, here, you want to know me? This is what you're getting. If you're still interested, after you go look at that, then come back. And he did. He did.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it. His comments were, "What's okay? What do you need from me? How do I help? What do we do here?" It became if I say no, no means no. It means not. No doesn't mean maybe. No means no, right? And we never ended
Yeah.
up there. But I also said to him that I don't know how I'm going to emotionally respond. I can't predict it because I've never been in that situation. So
Yeah.
you got to go with me. You gotta be with me, and you got to kind of let it go as it goes, and we work through it together, and be able to talk it through. And the first time we were intimate, and I ended up with a sex headache. And I don't know if you know what those are, but
I don't.
yeah, so you can end up with migraines when you're completely stressed. It sometimes can end up as coming out during sex, and so I would end up with migraines during sex, and so
How awful.
and he was working with me, going with me to the doctor. So he was like, "So I caused this." I was like, "No, you didn't cause this." But it's a way that your
Right.
body kind of responds, right?
Yeah.
And it took I was so just kind of overwhelmed by, just the whole, how do I do this? I don't know how to do this. And who do you talk to about it, right? Who the heck are you going to talk to about this? Right. So I spend a lot of time with people talking about intimacy because I understand, right? I've been there.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it, right? It's another part of life. But yes, so it was not easy by any means, but he's a good guy, and he is I guess I choose guys that are very self-aware and are very sensitive. And it's probably the opposite of my father, right? I choose
Yeah.
guys that are the opposite.
Yeah. Which of course, that's great that that's what you're attracting. I do have
Yeah.
a person comment who said, address the resurfacing of childhood demons, having lost the safe place of her high school sweetheart's embrace. What was it like? You had the kids there, you had to not be suicidal. So I know we're jumping back a little bit, but this is a great
Yeah.
comment. If I didn't address it well enough when we were discussing, is that you lost that and still had to take care of the kids, of course, and had to
Mhm.
keep yourself together and mentally stable. Like you said, you didn't want them to lose both parents to suicide. So how
Yeah.
did you, how, let's talk about the resurfacing of childhood demons when you lost your husband.
So I periodically had been dealing with nightmares. Some people would call them night terrors, but they're nightmares. Kind of waking up, and when I would wake up I had kind of gotten past that in the last 15 years prior to my husband's death, but it was one of the things that had happened when I was in my late 20s and early 30s and working through stuff. It was the way that memories surfaced and whatever for me, and that I would help me process. But I would, at that time, wake up from a nightmare state, uncertain where I was and unable to reconnect to what was around me right now. So with my husband, he was there. So, sleeping with my husband, if I woke up from a nightmare, he knew to talk with me, to just say, Nancy, it's me. Nancy, it's Bob. Nancy, and Nancy, wake up. He knew not to touch me, but he also knew that and he was that safety net, and I trusted him without any doubt. So he could get me out of that state in a few minutes. When he died and those nightmares resurfaced, which is really what happened, the nightmares resurfaced because I had lost that sense of safety. I would literally end up in the closet, curled up on the floor in the closet, trying to reconnect, reassociate. And so I was working with a therapist at the time, and we were coming up with strategies. In the closet, put a phone with a button that you can just push and call someone who knows that you might be calling in the middle of the night and can handle it. Put pictures of your adult children or children in there. So put a flashlight in there. Put at one point we said, I had an old stuffed animal that my husband had given me when I went off to college. And she's like, douse him, that stuffed animal, with his aftershave. Put an old shirt of his in there. So use the scent, whatever was to help ground, because I needed to figure out how to do it by myself. And that took probably 6 months to get through. And I had a friend who, dear friend, who, believe me, I think she was woken up in the middle of the night. I don't know how many times, but you gotta be willing and accept the help that's given and offered to you. And that was one of the hardest things that I had to learn, was to accept help from people that I
what
never
a
would have
great
come to
lesson.
previously.
Isn't that a lesson that's hard for like everybody in any situation? I mean, you can have a baby and have your neighbor want to bring you dinner and we don't know how to accept it. It's so ridiculous. I always felt like when you want to be the giver, it feels real great, right? But when you don't want to accept, you're robbing somebody of the blessings of being able to serve. And that's a huge thing for people. But yes, I mean, what a massive situation. It's not like a baby's born, you're bringing dinner. This is huge, a huge ask. So thankful for that. And I love that you said that you had a therapist who gave you very specific things to do, and you had people that you could call. You set up a support network in your closet. I think that's fantastic.
Yep.
I'm glad we went back
initially. Initially I was afraid to sleep.
Yeah.
I was afraid to sleep. So I was so sleep deprived. I was functioning on 2 and 3 hours of sleep, and you just got used to it, right? Because I was afraid to go to sleep because of what would potentially happen, right? So it just working through it with in therapy, working through it with, I was very fortunate in that. So I'm dealing with a suicide again, right? The woman that my husband was seeing a therapist at the time of his death. And I called her upon his death, and I went, and she became my therapist. Wow. And when I first went to see her, she was like, "Oh, good God, I'm blaming her for his death because she was seeing him." And right. And that wasn't the case at all. I needed really just to understand. But I think it was probably one of the best things that I ever did, because I needed to really be able to forgive myself and not blame myself for his death, right? That it wasn't on me, and that it wasn't something between the two of us, and that I could trust that. So because I was his next of kin, I was able to release his records to me so that she could share his insights or her work with him to me as it related to help me understand what happened here. Why didn't I see it? What the hell was going on? Did it have anything to do with me? And as I was talking about our relationship, she could almost kind of mirror him for me. And, because she had that relationship with him. So it was probably the best situation for me in that moment.
Wow. You mentioned it before that you got all of the CPS records. So I'm seeing a thread here. I would be the same way. To put the pieces together of situations is that you really advocated for yourself to get those things that made the biggest difference. You said earlier that, you didn't stand up to your dad, and that's a lack of advocating for yourself. Although on the flip side, you've done a lot of that. and put
Mhm.
things together and made sense of things. And so I think that's
Yeah.
important, like tool for people to realize is that if it's possible to get information to piece things together, that can be very healing and beneficial as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy huge. So you start dating again. You guys have been together for 3.5 years now, living
Mhm.
together for almost three. And
Yep.
let's talk about, I want to see how you worded this that I copied. You said understanding the impacts of your childhood had on your adult behaviors and focused on
Mhm.
body image and partner intimacy. So, in understanding your feelings, but working to change the ones that may be safe to do, like what's fear based versus what's truly a dislike or a value, and
Right.
assessing thoughts and behaviors. So let's talk about, you're in a new relationship, and let's talk about this because yeah, like being naked in front of someone, which is hard for
Exactly.
lots of women. Like that's like having sex or being intimacy, talking about what you like or dislike, normal things in an intimate relationship that you have this whole added dimension. So bring me through that.
So I think so how do I put this? So I'm not a thin woman, right? I'm a heavy set woman, right? And so there's this whole body image that sits there, right? And understanding
Yeah.
that in and of itself is, and so there's this another level of embarrassment, or there's this another level of, you know what, I don't like the way I look, or I don't, whatever. My husband accepted it because it was something that happened slowly. It was something that,
Yeah.
it wasn't a, right?
Yep.
So,
Uh-huh.
well, there's that, right? So that when I think about body image that way, I think that's a big piece. But what I didn't understand was how connected it was to my childhood.
Mm.
And I started Noom earlier this year, and and I'm
Mhm,
doing real
mhm.
well. But one of the things that Noom does is really focuses on connecting your food behaviors or eating behaviors, health behaviors to the emotional component. Why are you doing that? Break it apart. Are you really hungry, or are you doing it because it's a stress? Your emotional eating. Is it, how are you responding? And what that helped me with, and particularly just over the last year, has been to understand how much of my weight was related to feeling better through food. If I made
Mm.
myself not, I'm going to say it, not physically attractive, then I didn't have to deal with a guy looking at me, right?
Oh, yeah,
I was
no, I
going to
get that. Yep.
I was going to walk into a room and somebody was going to respect me because of my intelligence, because of what I did, but not because of what I looked, because I hadn't come to terms with that childhood baggage of how do you deal with a normal physical attraction? And when you see somebody that's attractive and you go, oh, that's nice, but when that was directed at me, I couldn't handle it. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until I finally could connect the pieces and understand that that's where that was coming from, that I'm okay. I've lost 50 pounds this year. And it's a
Wow,
lot of,
awesome.
yeah, but a lot of that is about coming to terms with letting go. So I think part of it becomes you are always, no matter where you are in life. I mean, I'm clearly pretty open, right? I clearly understand my past, but there's always another level. There's always another journey. There's always another piece. It's like peeling back the onion, and it will always have another layer. I don't think I'll ever get to the core. Um, but that's what I mean by body image. I think it's about literally exposing yourself to someone else, right? I mean, in every sense of the word, when you're naked, you're naked. I mean,
I like
I learned
naked. Here we are.
I learned how to be emotionally naked before
Yeah.
I learned how to be physically naked.
And I love the connection to your childhood. You're right. I mean, when you have babies and life happens and you get older, it does happen slowly. So, but then having to start over, it's like the lights are on and there's no hiding. So I love how you still in your 50s having that connection to how much is your childhood triggering your behaviors now, and that being that it's not a one and done, everyone. If anybody was waiting for a magic wand, there is no one and done, because it's constant. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and your body image and working on that. Let's unpack this in two ways, because you have your body image and just working on that emotionally and increasing or changing partner intimacy. And then there's you've been losing weight and how that affects partner and intimacy. How connected are those, or how separate are those?
I think they're very connected. I think I needed to feel emotionally safe before I could focus on taking that next step and more fully understanding the connection, right? And then being willing to go down that path. So I think of things as you will work through things when you are ready for that aspect. And I'm sure that there are going to be other things that I need to work on. Like if I ever, I've never broken up with a guy. Okay. So I get to that point. I don't know how to do that either, not that I want to, but if I did,
Yeah, who would have thought? Also, I love what you wrote about there are truly likes and dislikes and values. I mean, there can be something in a relationship in lots of ways, from how you make your bed to physical intimacy to how you have conversations, to that you don't like you dislike, or it crosses a value boundary for you. It's not just because you're an incest survivor that and everything's not fear-based, and everything's not a trigger too. You can just have things that you don't like, or that you want more of, or value system that you have. And so how have you managed to separate all of that from the fear-based issues and address them?
So one of the things that I've learned to do over time, right? This is a learned skill, and you learn it by practice, is to stop, right? I do not, how do I put this? I do not respond immediately if I'm feeling something, right? If I'm angry, I need to step out of it. I need to step away from it. I need to then kind of come back to it, right? It's the, you're pissed off at work, you go to write the nasty email to your boss kind of thing. I don't send it. Right? I look at it in 3 days, and if in 3 days I still want to send it, okay, I'll send it. But more likely than not, probably 99% of the time, I don't send it. Okay. Right. So I've learned I'm too tied up emotionally right now to kind of really process it. So I've learned not to make a decision, not to react in that, because it's probably not the way that I really feel. And then I have to come back to it when I can, which is not usually long, and unpack it, right? What did that connect to? Why did I feel that way? What was that bringing up for me? And sometimes I have to write it, right? Sometimes I use a lot of pros and cons lists, all of that. So that type of technique. I also chat with a friend, if I can't process something. So I'm very fortunate that I have two very, very dear friends that I can bounce things off of. And so they help me kind of process something so that I can then come back to, okay, if that came out of fear, then I need to address it that way. If that is something that's really bothering me, then I have to have a conversation around it to take it to the next step and express that that's not just fear. But even when it's fear-based, right? If I'm going back to the sexual intimacy stuff, he wants to try something different. Okay. I don't know if I'm going to like it or not like it. Right. And I'm afraid of it. Right. If I'm afraid of it and I say no, then I think then we come back to a conversation with, I'm scared, I'm not sure how I'm going to react. If we're going to try this, then this is what I need from you. I need you to be open to whatever. So I think for me, a lot of it's come down to being able to talk through something after I've been able to process it myself. And I've done that through not that immediate response, but delayed response.
Yeah. That was something I had to teach myself, the delayed response. I'm very extroverted. I'm very forward. I'm not afraid of how I feel or what I think. And I had to recognize that that needed to be dialed back. And I remember, I mean, this again, this is not about being an incest survivor. I remember having a conversation with my husband, and I looked at him and said, the level of anger I feel to this conversation is irrational and unwarranted. You know, like
Right.
my irritation level should be here and it's like way up here. So there's something in this that I'm reacting to that I don't even understand. So we need to not I need to walk away. We need to not talk. And
Right.
it's not because I'm angry with you. And it's not because I'm angry about the conversation. It's because something somewhere deep inside me, something has been triggered. And I am reacting in a way that I feel is irrational and unwarranted for the situation. It's like getting cut off on the freeway and absolutely going ballistically angry. That's an
Yeah.
irrational, unwarranted level of anger for what happened. I mean, it sucks and you can be irritated, but you shouldn't be like, screaming and
Right.
road raging, right? That's irrational. And this is part of learning communication. And my favorite word is boundaries.
Yes.
You need to set some boundaries on how things happen and how you interact. And, you know, if you're introverted and extroverted, you communicate differently. You've come from divorce, you communicate differently. And so I think as a recommendation for people listening, regardless of your situation, is knowing yourself and setting those boundaries and feeling okay with that. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it's about when you can I mean, I'm an intelligent, logical thinker, right? So
Mhm.
recognizing exactly what you just say, is my reaction exaggerated? If it is, then it's the time to stop. It's wait a minute, there's something more going on here. What is it? Did he just step over a value? Did he trigger
Mhm.
something? Am I just in a bad mood because I had a shitty day and it's the last straw? I mean, what is it? But it takes time to unpack it.
Yeah, it does. Okay, somebody commented and asked, let's see. This is a tough one. If someone feels sexually attracted to a parent. I'm not sure that this is the right place to go into that. That's something a little bit different. And it was hidden that it popped up, but it was hidden. So I had to actually figure out how to find that comment. I don't feel like this is the forum to discuss that. Nancy, if you want to address it, then that's fine.
So I'm gonna flip it.
Okay.
I'm gonna flip it, and the reason that I'm gonna flip it is there's physical attraction between two people, regardless, right? What you feel, you should always honor your feelings. My view, always honor your feelings, but you don't necessarily act on your feelings, right? And so the fact I can be say 15, pick a date, pick a year, whatever, very physically attractive, whatever. If I walk the street naked in front of my whatever, or my uncle, my father, pick a name, right? It's,
Right.
it's his responsibility to say, knock it off, go put some clothes on, or, whatever. But the boundary is in the action, not in the feeling, right?
Right.
I think that, we all at times feel anger, feel violence, feel whatever, but we don't necessarily act on it. It's learning to
That's a
separate the two.
great, yes. Okay. That is a great way to say it. Yes. Okay. So I mean, you have the same thing with that's how a lot of people start cheating. So infidelity comes into this. It's feeling an attraction in a situation where it's maybe not appropriate to feel it or where you need boundaries set. So I really, really appreciate that you addressed that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, that was a little bit off topic, but I like that. I like when people comment and want to be engaged. Um, let's wrap up. How do you want to? I always get to this point. Usually I have a pretty good idea of how we're going to wrap up. Not so much today. We've covered so much ground. We touched on the bullet points of our first interview and of your situation. Go back and listen to that first interview if you want to dive in a little bit more deeply. But I love this today because we've bridged the gap of a lot of stuff happening. New relationships after the death of a spouse, how to deal when you have kids at home, there's a suicide with your spouse. We've talked about, how to set boundaries with family members or how to advocate, like so much ground. Let's just open it up. And how would you like to end? Usually I like to end on like advice you'd give to someone or what you tell your younger self. This is a little bit, I feel like we're biting off a lot with this and how we want to end.
Yeah.
So why don't you direct
Well,
it?
I think honestly, if there's one thing that I've learned throughout the course of my life and everything, there's a couple of things. One is, no matter what, your past does not define you, and it does not define whatever you've been through. It does not define your future. You are in control, and you own how you act. You own how you behave. So I think you need to honor your feelings, recognize your feelings, honor them, but how you then respond and act is a choice. Behavior is a choice. So I believe honestly that you need to be able to, you don't have to do anything alone, right? There was always somebody who's there or willing to help, may not have been there, right? But is willing to kind of walk beside you as you go through it. And I think we as adults struggle to accept help and to say that I can't do this on my own. I think it's okay. It's okay to accept help. It's okay to say, I need help. And it's okay to just honor that. There's never going to be a time when it's always on you, or every relationship is a give and take. And I truly believe that, there'll be a time when I'm more giving than giving or than getting. And there was a time, believe me, I've had times in my life where I was getting a heck of a lot more than I was giving. But that's okay too, because you'll go through those phases.
Nancy, I'm just so hugging you so hard right now, virtually. I just have loved you. I didn't cry this time, so that's different than last time. Neither one of us cried today. Thank you so much for being brave and for sharing your story in a way that makes others feel so much less alone. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I have a term
Thank you
for that.
for investing your time with me on At a Crossroads with the Naked Podcaster. I'm so glad that you joined in the conversation. It would be amazing if you would share this episode with someone you think can benefit from it. All guests' links and audience freebies are available on the podcast page of momof18.com. This podcast was designed to help you in your struggles. So reach out and let me know what you enjoy and what you would like to see more of. It will support me on the journey to causing a worldwide epidemic of healing, gratitude, and joy. Until next time, remember, you're not alone in your struggle. Reach out to me on any platform. I love to connect. You are worth it to me.